Hello again, I'm Martin Stringer, and you have been listening to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking with reporters today in Ottawa for the first time since the election results came in on Monday night. Now, to look at what he had to say today and the new reality of a Liberal minority government, I'm joined now by observers from the different parties. Geoff Turner is a Liberal, Andrew Brander is a Conservative, and he's joining us from Toronto. And also in our Toronto studio is Kim Wright, and she is a New Democrat. All three of you, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start, I'm probably going to start with Geoff here in the studio because I want to start just by getting your reaction to what you heard today from the Prime Minister. Geoff, start with you.
Yeah, I think we had a really good outing from the Prime Minister today. I think he struck both the right tone in terms of how he was addressing the nation, and he hit on some of the most key information that people are hungry for as we face this relatively uncertain future under a minority situation. I think it was the reason I say the tone was important is I think folks on election night could obviously be a little bit dismayed by, I think, both the leaders talking over each other. They could be dismayed by campaign themes still being the only thing they talked about. Here we saw a Prime Minister without a speech. It was just a very quick remarks off the top, open to questions, answered every question he was given, and did so in a way that recognized that the job ahead is really difficult but also very important. And that it'll take working with both sides of the aisle in the Parliament to make that happen.
Andrew Brander, what did you make of what you heard today?
Yeah, the Prime Minister said the right things, but I think a lot of people are questioning the sincerity of what he said. The fact is, he spent the last better part of 40 days dividing Canadians, chastising premiers, and pinning provinces against each other. So I think when he was pressed on that question about how he plans to bring people together, he couldn't provide a single example of how he's worked collaboratively with the other parties in the past. And the fact is, the Prime Minister has no intention of doing that. He's going to govern this next Parliament just as he did the last one, in the sense of pretending it's a majority government and hoping that things break his way.
Okay, I'm going to go to you, Kim Wright, and I'm going to actually do a second round of this same question and drill down a bit more. But Kim Wright, your reaction to what you heard today?
So it wasn't really surprising in terms of he said the right things in more of a right-wing type of way, because he talked about going ahead with Trans Mountain. He talked about a tax cut. What Canadians were actually looking for was movement on making sure that the affordable housing plan actually goes from being yet another plan to actually implementation. We were looking to make sure that there was transit announcements and funding allocations. Beyond the rhetoric, we didn't hear anything around income inequality other than yet another tax cut, which ultimately leads to service cuts. That's not quite the thing that Canadians were looking for, especially in the whole boogeyman of, you can't elect a Conservative government, you can't elect a Doug Ford government, progressive voters coalesce around us, and yet his first words out of the gate are back to pipelines and tax cuts. That's not what Canadians are looking for in a minority parliament, and certainly what we weren't looking for right out of this gate.
Okay, Geoff Turner, Andrew Brander makes a point. I also noticed that in his press conference, the Prime Minister said there was not enough time for some substantive discussion of some very serious issues. Unfortunately, much of the focus was on me. This is the Prime Minister talking, and I regret that. But as Andrew Brander also points out, a lot of the focus was also on Andrew Scheer and other opponents. There was a very high level of personal or attacks on personal positions. How does the Prime Minister get beyond that, beyond just saying nice things today?
So I think it was important that he expressed that the campaign had been regrettable in many ways, as you just described. And I would just point out that actually, in fact, all three major party leaders were quite divisive in their rhetoric. Mm-hmm. On the Andrew Scheer side, I disagree that he would go out there and say that he ran the most positive campaign ever. That's just patently untrue. And Jagmeet Singh was engaged in some very divisive language himself. Now, he was unifying his supporters, but he was using it with foils on, the rich and corporations and things that were, frankly, just over the top. I'm not disagreeing with his ideology and saying he shouldn't have it, but he was being very, very pointed in his criticisms of people in Canada and using them to divide it. So both parties, including the Prime Minister, in the way that he campaigned against Doug Ford or campaigned against Conservative cuts or campaigned against social issues, they all did. So what Canadians kind of said on election night a little bit was a bit of a pox on all your houses, right? And I think what we saw today was the Prime Minister turning that corner, putting the campaign behind him. Probably good that he used a day in between the campaign and today to just settle down, think about things, go out and present a much more confident vision about how we can proceed from here.
Okay, Andrew Brander, on that same note, one of the things that was noticed was that on election night and again the day after, Leader, your leader, Andrew Scheer, did say we are ready to take the government down. There's a lot of talk about we are as strong and as poised and as ready as ever to take the government down and move on when we have the chance. And a lot of people are suggesting that doesn't really bode well for cooperation that is necessary in a minority government situation.
Well, it's nice to see, first of all, it's nice to see the Prime Minister acknowledge and take responsibility for the lack of exchange of real ideas during the campaign. As I said, that can be attributed to the fact that he liked to dredge up old issues that were not on the agenda and debate those instead of talking about real things. And speaking of debates, let's not forget he only agreed to one English language debate during the entire campaign. So putting that aside and moving forward now, given the result and the place that we're at, I think what Andrew Scheer is clearly saying is that he has a positive vision that he feels that he was given a strong mandate for. The Conservatives are obviously the winner. Andrew Scheer has a lot to be proud of, I should say, coming out of the election. We're the only party that increased our seats. He obviously won the popular vote, and those are things that he is very proud of, and that's a real mandate that he has to govern on. Or to work with the government to govern on.
Okay, well, that was my question. I mean, to what extent you sense that there is going to be cooperation, or just a waiting game for when the government falls? I mean, I'm just wondering, because the question is, how long is this minority government going to last? Is it in it for the long run or the short run? And I'm wondering in terms of your leader, Mr. Scheer, because
That's on you.
I couldn't hear you, Martin.
Yeah, the point was, though, that the way your leader was talking on election night, it sounded as if at the earliest occasion he would like to see the government fall. He didn't sound as if he was willing to work with the Prime Minister. He was talking about the relative strength of his position.
I think it's up to the Prime Minister to find the partners that he wants to work with for moving forward on these issues. Look, if they're in line with the priorities that Andrew Scheer established during the election, I see no reason why a Conservative opposition would not back strong ideas. But at the end of the day, let's remember the Prime Minister is still covered in this veil of ethics violations and other questionable actions that the opposition will continue to hold him to account for.
Okay, Kim Wright, in terms of the NDP, obviously, if we're looking at a minority government, a lot of the discussion is what kind of agreement there can be and what kind of support, on what basis the NDP can support the Liberal minority government. The Prime Minister today, and I think you mentioned, made it very clear that this government is going ahead and the progress is going ahead on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. What do you see as possible areas for cooperation and agreement in terms of what the NDP might like to see and might be willing to negotiate with the government?
Well, and certainly Jagmeet Singh outlined his 6 priorities during the campaign, but really we need to see meaningful action on pharmacare. We need to see actual meaningful action on Indigenous communities, getting rid of these boil water advisories, fixing the infrastructure that's in these communities to make sure that they have what would be considered proper living conditions in every other city across Canada, and not continuing to take Indigenous children to court. Those meaningful movements will go a long way in having support. But let's be clear, Canadians, whether you liked the election results or not, voters are never wrong, and they sent a minority government to Ottawa for a reason. They want to be done with this bickering, done with the toxicity, actually move forward on issues. And, you know, maybe Andrew Scheer might have been more popular on election night, which great. So was Hillary Clinton on election night. But it really boils down to how do you want to govern, and governing for Canadians with those priorities in mind. And that's why I look at this similarly to how I deal with municipalities across the country. It isn't necessarily about whether or not you're a right-wing councillor, a left-wing councillor, a right-wing mayor, a left-wing mayor. It's about how do you find common ground and grow from there. That's what Canadians are expecting. And if you're looking at that in a realistic, honest way, that also requires the Prime Minister to have a very strong relationship, not only with his own House leader, but with all the party House leaders and leaders' offices.
Okay.
But it also requires him to listen and really engage with members of parliament, let their voices be heard, hear what's actually happening. That kind of coalition and that kind of cooperation is expected, but it's really hard to do if you're acting as if you still have a majority government.
Okay, I want to get to something which really is pressing for the Prime Minister. He did not announce a date for the resumption of Parliament, or the recall of Parliament, for it to sit, but he did announce a date for the swearing in of the Cabinet, and that will be on the 20th of November. I'm going to start with Geoff here, because of course he's got the Prime Minister's ear. The biggest challenge is putting together a cabinet with no representatives from Alberta or Saskatchewan. If you had to blue sky it, what do you think the Prime Minister should be doing? What can he do to get over that big hurdle that he has?
So it certainly is a challenge. I think it's actually relatively unusual as well for a leader to announce a date that they were going to name their or appoint their cabinet in such a distance away from that date. I mean, normally we hear maybe a couple days beforehand.
But how does he get around that obstacle he has?
I think there's a couple things at play. One, I think the length of time that we've seen given until that day implies that there's going to be a fairly significant hard look, not only at the cabinet and who's where and what are they going to be doing in this new formation, but also I think probably an opportunity for the Prime Minister and the senior levels of his office to really connect with caucus and really work with caucus, both to get their suggestions on how to proceed, but also to ensure that they're trying to form the best possible cabinet out of their team.
Any brilliant ideas? What we're looking for is a brilliant idea of how he can get over this obstacle.
I don't have anything to add that we haven't heard already in the last day or two, whether
Yeah.
that's a senator or some kind of an advisor or appointing a member from close. I think all of those are potential options, and but I think certainly he made it clear today in his comments that he's going to be trying to find ways of listening. That includes the premiers, that also includes below the premiers, mayors, community leaders, and people, business leaders in those provinces. So I think he's going to be very overt in how he is trying to get that feedback, whether that's through a seat at the cabinet table, through some special configuration, is I think we'll find out in a month.
Okay, Andrew Brander, any idea on this situation that the Prime Minister finds himself in terms of cabinet making? Well,
yeah, he's got a big hole to fill. It will be. I'm waiting, just like everyone else, to see how he fills it. But it simply can't be something that he's going to ignore. It can't be something that he chooses to just put over, here in a box and pretend doesn't exist. There's a real sense of that feeling of Western alienation. Through and two huge gaps in those provinces that the Prime Minister will need to address. But I did also want to point out, although he did announce, as you said, a date for cabinet, he did not announce what date the House is coming back. And I think Canadians are eager to get back to see their politicians get back to work. The late date of cabinet would seem to sort of signal that the return of the House is probably not coming until the new year. That's a really long time for Canadians to wait, especially since now the Prime Minister's lost the ability to have the majority on committees. I know there's lots of questions in a lot of those committees that need to be answered, including further investigation into the SNC scandal.
Okay, Kim Wright, your thoughts on cabinet making. The Prime Minister has ruled out any formal coalition, so that would seem to rule out trying to recruit a member of an opposition party, i.e. the NDP, for example, as a cabinet member. I'm not saying that's impossible, but it just doesn't seem very likely. Your thoughts on how he should approach this dilemma that he finds himself in?
So he also has the additional challenge, unlike under the Conservative government under Harper, where he put in a senator to make sure that they had that Senate voice from when they were shut out, because you have independent, quote-unquote, senators. So that option isn't really afforded to Justin Trudeau in terms of that avenue of a Senate seat at the cabinet table for Alberta and Saskatchewan. But I actually thought it was quite smart of the Prime Minister to say, we're not actually going to swear in a new cabinet until the 20th of November. I think it gives him a chance to take a breath, take a pause, look at what his true agenda wants to be, get to know his new cabinet colleagues, his new caucus colleagues, but also get to know the opposition members. And he was really criticized in the last term of not even, frankly, knowing his caucus members very well, what mattered to them. He gets to really take a reset on that, and I think that's smart. Running into a legislative agenda when he has managed to mismanage so much of the last agenda, I think is actually a good move for him. And by setting a date that it's this far in advance, it stops all the panels from speculating about, is this person in today or is it tomorrow? I think setting out a proper legislative agenda with input from all of the Parliament, I actually think it should be his first order of business. Whether it will be or not, that's a whole different story. But Canadians really want the Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Parliament to get down to actual work and not just sniping.
Okay, well, on that note, we're going to have to wrap it up. But the interesting thoughts we will watch with great interest. We'll see when we do know a date for the resumption of Parliament. Kim Wright, Andrew Brander, and Geoff Turner, thank you very much for taking part. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Martin.